The biggest misconception about the waste management industry and the people who controlled it for decades is that people believe it was about sanitation, hygiene, or keeping the city clean. These three principles, which a public utility should be based on, were never the priority. Sanitation, efficiency, and public health were replaced by monopoly, extortion, and absolute control. The garbage business was never just a job, it was a currency. And in that life, trash was more valuable than gold because gold fluctuates, but garbage never stops coming. The rules for a private carter were the rules of the association and the rules of the cartel. And those particular rules were simple. You were not to bid on another man's stop. You were not to offer a lower price to a restaurant or a construction site that already belongs to another hauler. You would need to respect the invisible lines drawn on the map of New York and New Jersey. Your territory needed to be respected as if it were a sovereign nation. But with every rule, there is an exception. And there have been aggressive newcomers who tried to slip through the cracks, so to speak. One of the rules is you simply do not compete in a free market. You do not try to steal a contract. And I know there was a rule where you were not to approach the national chains without permission from the board. I am not 100% sure if that level of control exists today. Specifically in the 1980s and 90s, you were not to touch the stops of a made member. They were not allowed to use open violence against civilians if it could be avoided. Because on the other side, in the street wars, they were known to leave bodies in the streets. They did not want that kind of attention on a legitimate business license. So there is an exception to every rule. A rival carter in Long Island who refused to join the association had his trucks torched in the middle of the night and his drivers beaten as a result of that. The no violence rule applies to the business face of the operation, but all the major carting firms had enforcement arms active within them. Every company is going to have certain silent partners involved in the intimidation business, and they kind of turn a blind eye to the arson because it protects the route. The cartel members back then had no problem breaking the law on a daily basis, whereas in the legitimate corporate world, you couldn't price fix. Price fixing meant going to federal prison. So all these regulations that were put in place by the city were being broken. So when you have an entire industry that no longer follows the laws of supply and demand, it creates a billion-dollar shadow economy. Before they consolidated the routes, the head of each carting company was viewed like a feudal lord. So that is where they would get the term garbage king. And at some point, the major crime families realized they needed to organize these kings, and that is how the trade waste associations were born. So the major powers in the New York sanitation racket were the Lucchese family and the Gambino family, which on the street were known for having the tightest grip on the unions. There was the Genovese family, who controlled the waterfront and the incinerators, and they are like the nucleus of the environmental racketeering for the United States. So as far as the families operating in the tri-state area, they controlled the disposal of waste for 10 million people. It wasn't only the 5 boroughs. And then you have the creation of the property rights system, which was the idea basically of maximizing profit without doing any extra work. The system consisted of an agreement that every stop you picked up was your property for life, and they would basically dictate that the customer had no right to fire them. Territories were divided obviously by which family had a claim on which neighborhood. It is kind of like they cut their own zip codes out. But if a route overlapped, that is where the association would come in and hold a sit-down to make a ruling. So when they created the structure of the waste cartel, they set it up more like a government tax agency. From the bottom of that pecking order, you have the non-union drivers and the helpers, who are considered the grunts. Anybody that is actually lifting the bags is considered labor. Above them are the dispatchers and the shop stewards, who are often the eyes and ears of the organization. We call them the gatekeepers in that life. Above them are the owners of the small carting companies, or as we say, the fronts. They are the face of the license.
The industry is represented by all the trucks on the road, and then above them are the consultants and the silent partners from the crime families. The top of the administration is the capo, who oversees the rackets, the union representative, and the association president, and that is the structure of the whole scheme. The term property rights means ownership of the customer. And that basically means that the contract of the restaurant, or as people would call it, the service agreement, belongs to them, not to the business owner paying the bill. The industry sucks you in. The easy money picks you. You don't pick that life. So before someone becomes a major player in the hauling business, they usually start with one truck. And usually how they become an insider is they are approached by someone who is already established in the association. In order for an independent hauler to be allowed to operate, several factors take place. One is how willing they are to pay the dues to the association. You know that they play by the rules. They do not bid low, and they keep their mouth closed about the bid rigging. Once you are accepted, a meeting takes place. Who is conducting that meeting is going to be a member or members of the association board. Along with them is obviously the mob associate who is guaranteeing your protection that day. A ledger and a map are on the table during this meeting, and it is mostly there for territorial reasons. Your route list, whether you have 50 stops or 500, is analyzed. Your stops are entered into the master book, a record of rights. It just symbolizes that the territory you are claiming and the customers you are about to service, you are taking them with the blessing of the cartel. And they ultimately shake hands on the deal, and you are agreeing to kick back a percentage of every ton you dump. And you are repeating the promise that you will never steal another man's stop. After which, he is explaining the consequences of being a cowboy or an outlaw hauler to you. My position within this world was what you might call a mediator, but there were times that I acted for the owners in the capacity of a negotiator, specifically for a route sale. The administration would pick who was allowed to buy a route when an old-timer retired. The requirement to buy a route obviously would be having the cash and the approval, so they would have to see something in that person to feel that he would not cause trouble. That owner is responsible for every truck in his fleet, but he is also responsible for paying the tipping fees at the mob-controlled transfer stations. A sanitation consultant position is that of a fixer, so he is specifically handling not only internal disputes over who owns a dumpster behind a deli, but external problems with city inspectors as well. The difference between a legitimate recycling center and a mob-fronted transfer station is not a whole big difference with the exception of what happens to the trash. Obviously, the legitimate center separates the plastic, but the mob-fronted station holds just as much garbage, but buries it cheaper. Overall, a consultant's position is to maximize the spread. He is really in charge of the difference between what the customer pays and what it costs to dump the load, which goes through the pockets of the administration, the captains, and the politicians. The way the life is structured, the major corporate haulers were supposed to abide by the same rules that the local guys, the independent carters, and everyone else in that life abide by, or they would find their drivers on strike. A single commercial route could bring in $2 million per year. There are many reasons to sell a route. One obviously would be an owner is indicted or caught up in a federal investigation. One would be an owner passes away and has no sons to take over the trucks. But then there are also reasons like in the 1990s crackdown, an owner that they felt was cooperating with the task force and the family forced him out. There are different scenarios where a company can be seized, dissolved, or ultimately absorbed by a larger firm. I think years ago when it was first created, the property rights system, there was a lot more corruption regarding having the dump sites on the payroll than there is today. I think there is less of that going on, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't go on. As far as environmental damage, obviously it would go through mixing toxic chemicals into regular residential waste to save on disposal fees. In present times,
I don't think that they have the stranglehold on the landfills that they once had. I don't think they are able to dump hazardous waste in a hole in the ground as easily as they were years ago. Initially, the mob took control of the industry by force. They would physically block the trucks, they would beat the drivers, take over the routes, and that is how they were able to control most of the commercial waste, specifically in New York and New Jersey. But today, they have their hand in it in niche areas like soil removal and construction debris, but they don't control the entire city's sanitation department like they did in the past. The organized control of garbage came to be in New York sometime in the mid-20th century. This was an organization and structure that evolved because the job was dirty and polite society did not want to deal with it. When the immigrants from Italy and other places took these jobs, they were looked down upon as scavengers. So in the beginning, it was a way to feed their families when no one else would hire them. But naturally, that turned into recognizing the immense leverage they held over the city. If the garbage doesn't move, the city stops. So when the average citizen started to take notice of the garbage racket here, I believe that the first reactions were annoyance at the high prices. Because they feared the carters and they were intimidated over having their trash left to rot on the sidewalk, they were also fearful to complain to the Consumer Affairs Department. They were fearful to switch companies. In turn, the cartel gained its power because of this silence. So I got involved in the waste industry because I came from a family, both in Brooklyn and Staten Island, which was replete with men who drove trucks. And I believe that I looked up to the independence of it at that time and wanted to make that kind of cash. If you are around people that are in that life, the carting business, at some point you become part of the operation. And we were associated, my uncle and I, to a mid-sized hauling firm that kicked up to the Lucchese family. And the time I'm talking about, I was around 19 or 20 years old. So sometime around the late 1980s, I became a dispatcher and on record with the company. By 1992, I was managing a route of 300 commercial stops. I stayed in the management side of the industry until the early 2000s. I ultimately wound up leaving the business because the federal government brought down the major indictments that dismantled the Trade Waste Association. They were now looking at everyone, which meant that they sent forensic accountants to look at the books. Usually when that is done, it is either to A, indict you for tax fraud, or B, force you to sell to a national corporation. I made my decision that I would not testify against the people I grew up with, but I would not go to jail for them either. So obviously my life has taken a dramatic change. I am no longer waking up at 3 in the morning to check the trucks. I am not able to walk into a restaurant and know that I own the trash out back. I have to work a regular 9 to 5 and be very careful with my taxes, and my income has to be reported down to the last penny. So my financial life took a big change. In my opinion, in 20 years from now, the traditional mob influence in garbage is hardly going to exist in the same way. I don't believe that they are going to be able to compete with the massive multinational conglomerates. The garbage racket now, compared to years ago, has definitely declined. And the reason is these regulations that are being enforced. The Business Integrity Commission and specifically the federal oversight have unlimited resources. They are able to track every truck with GPS. They were able to break the property rights system with the RICO statutes. As far as earning money by inflating prices or bid rigging, it is limited today than it was. So now, once you limit the monopoly and the price fixing, you are taking away the profit margin because competition brings down prices. And the organized crime element today is definitely less profitable than it was in years past. In the past few years, there has been an increase in scrutiny on the recycling sector. Specific types of waste, like electronic waste and construction soil, are targeted. And the reason being is that it's hard for the old school guys to operate without the digital paper trail exposing what they are doing. There are more cameras at the waste stations. They have GPS trackers on the containers. That is how they are dismantling the schemes. Truck by truck, they dismantle them. Regulators from the sanitation department now work very closely with environmental protection agencies. They jointly create investigations together. I made the decision to document this history, and I started writing about the way the city used to work. The first project I created is a series of articles on the history of the cartel, and that is also the basis for my new book. And I just recently started researching the new frontier of waste crime, which involves the illegal export of plastic. In the next episode, we will talk about how the mafia is infiltrating the green energy sector in 2025. Stay tuned.